Iowa City High School.
Natalie Niemeyer. I teach journalism as well at Des Moines East High School.
We're just going to podcast about media lit and journalism and podcasting, kind of let all the teachers and tech people kind of know a little bit about what's going on in high school journalism and how our students are kind of using technology for media lit and other things like that we think that a whole bunch of teachers can use like in any class pretty much. So that's kind of the theme or idea of our show here today. Thanks for coming. Would have been lonely in here by yourself.
Yeah, for real.
All right. So should we give it a shot?
Sure.
Hi, welcome to the IHSPA JEA podcast, coming straight at you from iTech 2017. Today on the show, my name is Jonathan Rogers, and I'm a journalism teacher from Iowa City High School in Iowa. And I'm really lucky to have Natalie Niemeyer on the show with me today, too.
I'm happy to be here. I teach at Des Moines East, and I've been advising yearbook and newspaper for about 7 years.
Great. Yeah, I've been in the high school journalism game for about 15 years now, and really excited to be here. Hopefully we'll share with you some of the things going on in high school journalism, media lit, podcasting, and I think there's a lot of things that hopefully we're going to talk about that can be used in any class.
Absolutely. Just like this morning, I attended John's session about how teaching media lit can save the world. And you don't have to be living under a rock right now to know that teenagers, well, everyone, is really having a hard time trying to decide what is real and what is fake when it comes to news. And so that's something I know that teachers in Des Moines Public Schools have really been struggling to teach our students. You know, how do we make sure that students are truly understanding what is real and what is not?
Yeah, it was great talking about media lit this morning, and it was great having a bunch of teachers and tech people interested in media lit and journalism. I know it's been a topic that I've cared about and loved for a long time, and I think a good thing of the fake news problem and other things that are happening is that a lot of people are really interested in media lit now. And I do think that it's very important, and it's really important that our students are getting taught. And it all kind of started last spring when the Stanford research came out that said that students can't tell what's real and what's fake online, and they also aren't getting much media lit training in high school right now.
And John, do you think that's because this is such a new issue? Like in the last couple of years, you know, we haven't really been dealing with the notion of fake news. So me as a teacher, I've been teaching for 7 years. I've never really had to think about this before. Do you think that's why it's becoming such an issue? We just don't know what to do or what to say to our students?
You know, I think the last media lit class I had about 20 years ago in college was about, you know, newspapers and TV. And the big change is the internet and technology. And that I think none of us as teachers have really been taught how to teach students. So one of the great things in the last 6 months that I really tapped into Julie Smith, a media lit professor out of St. Louis, and she wrote a book, Master the Media, which was great, and I learned a lot from that. And also the News Literacy Institute and Newseum and Checkology is a new blended learning platform online to help deal with this new problem. And on the good side, what I've learned is that there's a whole lot of people working really hard out there that I thought I would have to create lessons, and you do not. Newseum and Checkology and the News Literacy Institute have spent countless thousands of dollars and are providing amazing free resources for you teachers to use.
And I think that's kind of where I was so held up. I wasn't aware of the resources that were available. So when I was meeting with my PLC, we were trying to start from scratch. And I think that that's where our biggest problem was. So as far as like what you give your students, like what tools do you equip them with that's going to help them be more media literate?
Yeah, I kind of have a 3-step program. The first step is teaching them how to get a variety of news sources on their phones. The second step is actually using the online resources from Newseum and Checkology and an actual book in Master the Media. And then the third step is just kind of constantly asking those questions and getting the habit, where did I get this from? And hopefully having a kind of attitude that I think we've become a little soft in teaching kids and students about being media literacy tough. Like, we are just sharing and accepting information from sources without questioning them. And I think that is extremely problematic, and that we as teachers and citizens and people need to get tough in our kind of views of, hey, where am I getting this information? Do I trust it? Does it have a liberal bias? Does it have a conservative bias? And really, I think that that's the three-step kind of process that I've been talking about. And the first step is that I remember when we went to the Washington Post, they asked us, where do we get our news? And the answer is on our phones. So we need to start teaching students how to get news on the phone.
And follow the right people on Twitter. Like, who are you following on Twitter? Is this a credible site? So kind of at lunch, I was talking about how I think that teenagers contribute a lot to fake news just by using the retweet button. Have you seen your students doing that? Do you address it with them when you see it happening? Yeah,
I think we all have something to blame in this. It's not just the media companies or journalism, that when we retweet and share bad information as on Facebook or Twitter, social media, that definitely causes a lot of the problem. And the Newseum has a great poster of kind of steps to go through of like, should I share this? Does it look legitimate? Does it come from a credible source? I know one of my good friends always says, think about it again, go check another resource, and then if you still think it's a good idea to share it, then, maybe that is. And I think that everyone needs to consider themselves a media outlet now too, that you guys are all, Twitter and Facebook, these are publishing outlets, and you guys are publishing something to the world when you retweet and share that. And it's important to think, do you really want to put your name and your credibility behind whatever you're sharing out?
I really like that you brought that up this morning in your session, how you were saying students need to consider themselves as, journalists every time they're publishing something, whether that's a retweet or their own original tweet, but they're helping, propel this fake news if that's what they're choosing to retweet. So it's just a really interesting thought that they should, think really hard about what they're doing before they do it.
Yeah. I think it's really important as they're on the social media and other things like that. And also, I think if most of them aren't making choices in where they get their news, so customize your Google News feeds, customize your Apple feeds, use Flipboard custom magazines, use Twitter lists, and go to allsides.com and check out, I really like allsides.com. It'll tell you liberal, conservative bias, reliability, and that way, they're making choices. The worst thing that people can do is just do a Google search or take whatever comes up on Facebook. So I think a lot of the problems of fake news will be eliminated if we just get beyond the Google search and just whatever pops up on Facebook. And I think Google and Facebook are making some strides, but I think we as teachers, you should not trust a Google search or Facebook. Those are very untrustworthy platforms right now. And I think they're realizing that, and they are taking a lot of criticism, and they should. Google and Facebook are a huge part of the problem right now.
Right. So in your classroom, I know in my classroom that we've just started implementing some activities of like how to identify fake news. In your classroom, in your intro to journalism class or any of your publications classrooms, what would a day look like when you guys are talking about fake news in class or media literacy?
Two things that I've done differently this year after this is that I bring up allsides.com and I also bring up Snopes. And I think Snopes has been mind-blowing. That's our crappy sound effect right here. Just the massive amount of bad information on the internet, conspiracy theories, alternative websites. There is so much junk out there. And I think students are asking me, what's real, what's not real? And I think Snopes is the best place right now to go to. And thank you, Google. I will say thank you. You are giving them millions of dollars and having people check this out. And Snopes has gotten a lot better in the last 6 months, and there's a lot more research behind how they fact check things. And that has been, I know it's changed my consciousness, and I think it's changed my students' consciousness of being able to tell what's real, what's not real, and just to be really aware of how much bad information is out on the internet right now.
Right. So I know I mentioned that I hadn't always felt comfortable, having this discussion with my students because I really wasn't sure where to go with it. So for teachers like me, people who are just starting to grapple with this with their students, what advice do you have for teachers who are going to start implementing some of these into their lessons or into their classroom discussion?
Yeah, I'm actually switching classes with some social studies teachers, and basically I'm going to go in and I'm going to teach students how to get custom news feeds, how to make choices so that they can have good information. I'm not telling them where to get their news, but I'm telling them how to get it, and that they can make their choices on how to get their news feeds. Just don't take a Google search or whatever pops on Facebook. And the other thing is go to the fact-checking websites. If you don't know something's real, check out Snopes, check out PolitiFact. And not everything's gonna be 100% true or 100% false. I mean, there's a lot of gray area. I think that one thing that I say in my presentation too, I will go to town like on the facts. Journalism, mainstream journalism, the facts will be right. And if they're not, we'll make a correction. Now, bias and truthiness, that's always up for debate. And I think the social studies teachers were really interesting in that really that's a whole part of our history class is 20 or 30 years we look back and be like, what's the truth? What's real? What really happened? Looking at different sources, trying to figure out, was it the person in charge, the president or whatever, trying to tell you what reality is? Or was it a reporter? Was it this? And those are essential academic, amazingly good questions that always be debated. And I was talking with a social studies teacher who said yesterday, it's interesting now, this used to be kind of the realm of like, hey, let's look back 30 years ago and try and figure out the truth of what really happened. And we're actually now with the internet trying to like do that in real time almost, which I think is part of the interesting dilemma, I guess, we're in about, always seeking truth. And I think that's a fundamental good thing of journalism is that's an essential question and problem of how do we find truth? How do we seek truth? How do we get both sides? And there aren't easy answers to those questions.
So what I've gained just from being here today and sitting in on your session is that this is a discussion that should happen across curriculum. It doesn't matter if you're teaching history, it doesn't matter if you're an English teacher or journalism. This is a discussion that all teachers should be having with their students.
Oh yeah, for sure. This is something, media lit, according to the state of Washington, ISTE standards, Iowa Common Core standards. I'm not telling everybody what to do, but it's in every standard. I mean, everybody should be teaching media lit from K through 12, from the basic, just asking, my first grade daughter, hey, where did you get that story from? Or do you trust that information? Or, other things like that, all the way up to 12th grade where you can do checkology blended unit projects and debate the essence of truth and bias and sources and all that stuff. So I think that it shouldn't just be English teachers or social studies teachers or journalism teachers. I think everybody should be asking these questions for sure.
Yeah, agreed. I know this is something that I'm going to be taking back to our VLC because it's something that needs to be shared as well with, I think, our English teachers. It's so important right now and so relevant. So I think the time is now to be having these discussions, not just with our students, but with our peers at school.
Totally agree. All right, it's my turn to ask you questions.
Yeah,
now.
I'm ready.
All right.
By the way, this is my first podcast. I'm almost embarrassed to say that, but I'm really excited.
Just nail it.
Well, thank you. My dad said that maybe I have a career like in broadcast journalism, so maybe I'll have to send him this link and see what he thinks.
I will say I started off doing podcasts with my 4 or 5-year-old son after I went to a conference like this, and they were like, oh, you should do podcasting. It's great, high interest thing with your students. Grab a USB mic, throw it in the computer, see what happens. And it's addictive. I think it's great. And I think my students saw, oh my God, a 4-year-old kid can podcast and we talk about Hawkeye sports.
Well, Jack's like famous though.
He is a famous Hawkeye blogger.
Yeah.
He did predict the 12-0 season. And,
I remember that.
Die Hard and everything. So
I love it.
It's great. Kids can do it. And I think that's a good example of elementary school kids can podcast. And oh my God, talk about puppies, cuddling with puppies. How cute is it to have little kids on a talk show? And, kids say the darndest things, and they're really funny, and it's great. And I think, he's definitely helped me find the joy in sports, as the keynote was Find Your Joy this morning. And I think that, having kids talk about the joy in what they see and in sporting events and other things like that. There's a magic to podcasting, and when I love seeing my students sitting around in front of mics and talking, and I think it's an amazing learning experience. I know I'm learning right now, just processing and talking with you about topics, and it'll be fun to go back and play it and listen to it and have that record,
Yeah, absolutely.
forever. This will be on the web forever.
Forever. Yes. Okay, so when your kids podcast, so me, I'm thinking of implementing this like into our newspaper classroom in the near future. When your kids are podcasting, what are they talking about? Is it completely, something that's going on like in their lives? Is it journalistic? Like, what is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the question of why should anyone care? The hardest question of journalism. The best ones have been, we've done a Politikid podcast. A lot of my reporters have got to cover major political events. So it's great, like, hey, after John McCain just showed up in town, like, write their little story, but also, hey, why don't you guys go talk about what happened? I remember Carol Lindick from the Washington Post, they did a video kind of podcast over the top of their hard journalist story where they'd heard another reporter that was just like, hey, debriefing kind of about what happened and talking about their story and the choices that they made. We did a Minority Report podcast that actually came to iTech last year where they talked about minority issues as they're still really important and trending in our country right now. Sports is always fun to talk about, hey, what's happening at your school. I'd say keep it local, keep it what's going on. I know English teachers and social studies teachers, they do the history podcast or a book podcast. Or
that's a great idea.
So there's implementations for podcasts in any class. And I think the key is to have done a little research, have the outline, and I'll put up, I have an ISTE approved podcasting outline. It's great that I can throw on here.
We're gonna need that.
So those are my kind of tips on it. And the thing is to just do it. Just get it out there, get a mic, have them do it. And if they have some repetition, do it 3 or 4 times, they're gonna get pretty good at it after the 5th time. And keep it short too.
Right. And we already have a platform, our Snow site, school newspapers online. So I feel like from talking to you that we can easily upload what we're working on there and have that be like our hub for not just our print stories and our photos, but also our podcast.
Yeah, and on the tech side, we do use GarageBand and Soundtrap and SoundCloud to upload, but you can easily upload to Google Drive and other things like that. And there's Audacity and some other free recording software out there.
Cool. Yeah, we're excited.
Okay, do I get to ask you questions?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
All right. Natalie is an amazing journalism teacher here in Des Moines who works in an urban setting. And I think one of the things that I really wanted to ask her about were some of the things about student voice and getting students engaged in her classroom. Because I know she just won Iowa High School Journalism Teacher of the Year. Was that a year or 2 ago?
Yes, a year ago.
And I think part of that and why we all love the work she's doing is that she gets students that maybe not so engaged in school and she gets them engaged. So I guess I just want to ask you, what's the secret? How do you get student voice in technology and get those kids that maybe aren't into school, like engaged in your classes?
Yeah, so a little bit about East. We're a really diverse school. 100% of our students receive free lunch, so that kind of gives you an indication of the socioeconomic status of our students. I think a lot of times there are a lot of students in situations where they feel like school is a burden for them. And so I kind of like for our journalism classroom to be a place that they look forward to coming. And all morning I've been texting my newspaper editor because she's been in my classroom working. And I just feel like the big thing about teaching journalism for me is that students have so much freedom. They can choose what stories they're interested in. Countless times I have counselors come to me, coaches, and they're like, hey, can we get this story written about in the paper? Or can you guys post something to your website about this? And I'll say, sure, I'll kick it to the kids and we'll see what they think. I think it's such a misconception that, I am the gatekeeper of the newspaper and I'm the one that decides what goes in, when truly it is just what the students want to be writing about. So sometimes I think it results in us having not balanced coverage maybe, but at the end of the day, it's not really my product. It's a product that the students produce and that they're proud of. So I think that students gravitate towards my class because they do have that freedom to write about, whatever they want to. As far as like my journalism classes, and John and I were just talking about how John has a journalism class that's a trimester. Mine is a semester, actually used to be a year-long course. And so, how do we give students multiple chances to talk about things that are of interest to them? In my classroom, we utilize WordPress blogs, and WordPress is something that my newspaper students use as well for their SNO site. And I think that just having an outlet of a blog available to a student at any time to write about anything they want, it can be, an app on their phone that they've downloaded, they can log on when they get to my classroom. I just feel like, especially with like what was happening last year with politics, still is happening, students need like an outlet. And sometimes they find that in a simple blog post.
Yeah, just on the New York Times, that anxiety is reaching all-time highs in our teenagers. And I do think that outlet, that creative outlet, like I had a student that, he didn't care about Romeo and Juliet, but when we did blogging in my language arts class, he would write for days on fishing. And he talked like an AP scholar on that, and it was amazing. He had a passion about it, a knowledge. And I think giving them that is so key, and I just love that you're bringing that blogging and giving these kids that voice to do that. So and on that, do you have any other, like at tech conferences, I'm always amazed. It's student voice and authentic, let's not just use technology to say, hey, we're using a computer. So I think that you do such a great job of having the student voice and using technology. Do you have a couple quick examples of how you're using technology to like publish in authentic ways that maybe some other teachers could use?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll just start with like the foundation of like what my students use. We use Adobe Creative Suite, and my students, I found once I teach it to them, they're using it for their other classes as well. So they might have a project that they're working on for their English class at Central Academy, and they might decide to do it on an InDesign document and do like a photo illustration to go with it. So I feel like what they're learning is kind of like, reaching all different aspects of their educational journey, whether it's at East or beyond. Something that has recently come into my life is a website called Trello. I don't know, John, are you familiar with Trello at all?
I've experimented with Trello world.
So the reason that Trello, first of all, Trello, it's technically a collaboration tool that helps you organize projects. And if you are a teacher, you know that organization is so important, especially when you are trying to produce a school publication that has multiple drafts, multiple page layouts. So Trello is a website that is going to be accessible to students anywhere. It's not just something that's available at school. I don't know about you guys, John, but we recently lost our school server because it was becoming too expensive for them to maintain. It had too many issues. So I was kind of left thinking, what are we going to do without this server that we store all of our stuff on? So Trello kind of stepped in, and we're using that as a place to organize all of our stories, all of our drafts of our InDesign documents, photo illustrations that students are creating in Photoshop. They are all able to be placed onto a Trello board. So for each issue, we'll have a separate board. And so draft 1 will go in the draft 1 column, draft 2, and they can upload PDFs. It's just super easy because technically, if a student had access to InDesign or Photoshop at home, they could be working from home. Not a lot of my students have those things, but they can really work from anywhere. And it's just all about organization. And I do think that Trello could really easily be used in an English classroom, in a history classroom, just anywhere where students are looking to have their work organized and go through the process of drafting. So once it's been here, someone can drag it over to final draft, or they can drag it back over to needs more work. It's just a really easy way for students to organize and for the teacher not to feel stressed about where things are. And it's free.
That's awesome.
Which is amazing.
All right, one other point I want to bring up from this morning. They talked about how it's so important to get over telling students what they shouldn't be doing and then showing them possibly what they can do. And I think that you do such an amazing job of that. How do you inspire and show students what they can do instead of like, I think a lot of times if you have a behavior problem class, you're always like, don't do this, don't do that, like, stop, what are you doing? To get out of that kind of negative cycle, especially with, some kids who might be not interested in school so much. How do you inspire or show students, what they can do with technology and like in the journalism world and yearbook? You're really good at yearbook. Do you have like a good yearbook example?
Yearbook is kind of my thing. I don't really know when it happened. I was the editor of my high school yearbook my junior and senior years. And it just kind of really stuck with me. But I think the thing that my students tell me the most is that it's never good enough. Like the work that they submit, I'm always like, well, I think we could look at this one more time. And
that's a good start.
Right. Literally, I had my editor texting me this morning, sending me pictures of our cover of our newspaper that goes to print tomorrow. And, normally someone might say, that looks great. And I was like, this looks great. But, and I've had multiple students come back from college and just say that, they're glad that things were never good enough the first time. And I had a teacher who was the same way towards me. Stacy Haynesmore was my high school journalism teacher, and I thought I was a great writer, and she would oftentimes really like sit down with me and help me understand that the first time I wasn't a good writer, and then I got to that point because of her. And so I think just never having the work be good enough. And then something that you said like inspiring. An inspiring moment to me was my kids got their work submitted for a state yearbook award last year, and they ended up getting 3rd in the state for their work.
There's sound effects.
Yes, thank you. Which is really cool because they came in behind 2 schools that are just yearbook giants. I mean, they win the state awards every year. Their advisors are amazing. They're like career goals, if you ask me. And they've been advising for like longer than I've been alive. They're killing it. And so this was cool for my kids to see that like, they can achieve at this high level. And that's just what our whole district is really working on right now, is like having students understand that they can achieve at a high level, and they will in our district. So I think just pushing kids at all times is really what is important.
Yeah, I just had a flashback to one of my journalism teachers that always used to say, like, nothing is ever done, it's just published.
That's so true.
I think that's what's nice about, when you're in activities with technology where you are publishing, is that you do have that, all right, let's get it published, but, let's do it again. Let's look at it, let's, refresh and reflect and give those insights and then go back and go through it. It reminds me, I know you played sports as well, and it's always when you get done with a game, you're always like, crap, I could have done this better and this better and that better. You're kind of Monday morning quarterbacking yourself.
Yes,
I know that I use a lot of sports analogies, and I know Kirk Ferentz the other day said, it's not time to hit the panic button, it's just time to hit the get better button. So I had like the get better button kind of metaphor going. And I think that that's so important for students to realize, hey, this isn't just some 2-page essay that I'm going to write and do. This is something that we're going to hopefully you want to do, and you get better, and you keep hitting that get better button. And the teachers can provide that feedback, hopefully, to help them grow and do better themselves, and that they get that intrinsic desire that tends to happen a lot in sports, but for some reason that doesn't always happen in school.
No, it doesn't. And I think as teachers, for me at least, my goal is always to learn from my students. And I think that happens every single day, whether it be learning something socially or academically or, whatever. But I've had multiple students who are now in college and even out of college, which is hard for me to believe, but they have come back and asked if they could teach a mini lesson to my publication students. So I recently, last week, had a student from last year come back and talk about video, which is something that I'm not really that good with. He was in my class last year, and I was like, just do your thing. Go out, find some resources, find a workshop that you can go to, we'll make it happen, do some job shadows, and he did all of that. And now he's been coming back, and it's coming full circle for me, which is really cool. Yeah. And I think just by giving students an outlet in your classroom to have freedom to do what they need to do, even though I was unable to really guide him that much, just giving him that safe space and that time to do what he needed to do really like help him like come into who he is now.
Yeah, and the keynote this morning was talking about, you know, are we ruining kids' lives? Are we helicoptering? Are we overbearing? And everybody around us were like, heck yes, we are. And I think we need to think about that as teachers. And I know in journalism classrooms, it's always a struggle of like how much freedom to give them. But I think that that's one of the great parts is that they do have ownership. They can lead class. They can come back after they graduate and teach lessons. I love it when I'm trying to help a student or whatever, and an editor jumps in or is there and be like, I got this, Rogers, like back off, like I'm fine, we can do this. And I think that teenagers and people in general, like they want ownership, they want the freedom, they want to be in charge. And even just a little thing of giving them power, and it's not a little thing, but giving them what may seem like a little thing over teaching a lesson or helping another student or whatever, that can be really powerful for students and engagement in the class and other things like that.
And we were kind of talking earlier about how, you know, we want to give our students space instead of, you know, them asking us for help multiple times a class period. How can we redirect their questions to a student editor or to a peer? You know, and I'm kind of trying to find the balance of giving students space and kind of like stepping back, but also pushing them and making sure they know like what I'm trying to push them in. So I have a couple students who it's their third year in my class. And so the work that was happening last year just isn't good enough this year.
Right.
You know, what do you have those students in your class, and like how do you push those students?
I like I know we use the metaphor kind of analogy of open versus closed groups. And closed groups are like people don't know where to find answers, they fight, they don't talk to each other, everyone's closed off, you work in your own little bubbles. And then an open group is everyone knows where to find an answer to a problem. People talk to each other, they're having some joy and fun in the classroom. It's not a big deal for students to work together on team projects. And those are successful groups. And I think that those are really important life skills and leadership skills. I remember I was at a journalism conference and the student said, you know, and she graduated, I thought that when I got out of high school, the team projects and group projects would be over. And then I was like, crap, I realized life is a group project.
It is.
I think that that's pretty true and a great thing of project-based classes and using technology to do that. So just to, I think to recap and close up here before we have a little question time, to go over like, do you have like some final thoughts here on what you kind of said about?
Yeah, I think just make sure whatever your content is, whatever you teach, that you're giving students a chance to be heard, whether that is a chance to discuss, use something like a blog to just write their thoughts down, something non-traditional. You know, I think that oftentimes that's really what students need. And so however you can make that happen in your classroom, I think is really important. And that's, you know, why I have kids in my class who other teachers will be like, oh, that student, like they don't do anything in my class. And, you know, to me, they're a completely different person. It's just all about that freedom. So whatever means you have to give them that, give it to them.
Yeah, and I think my big thing on Media Lit is like, let's get tough, teachers. Let's say we have some answers and what is real and what is not real, and teach students to ask tough questions about where they get information and what they believe, and evaluate sources and be able to go to Snopes and fact check and know and be like, I know this is real, I know this isn't real, so that they can get in the debate and get into what they believe in and form their own thoughts. I have never seen more students in any class interested in serious journalism and what's going on in our world than I have over the last year. And God knows there are very important things for all of us to be teaching and aware of in our media for sure.
Yeah, and if you're anything like me and you're kind of hesitant to get involved in this discussion with your students, you know, check out some of the resources that John has mentioned today.
Go to Newseum, go to Checkology. There's great little mini lessons. There's great ways where you can have a positive media literacy lesson with your students and teach them very important things about how to get news and avoid, you know, I think some teachers are definitely afraid of some bad political discussion or something like that. And I think there's great ways to not get in a bad political debate, but get in a really healthy, like, hey, this is how you get information, this is how you know what's real, what's not real. This is how you seek truth and create your own truth and, you know, debate what's going on in our world, which we definitely can't shy away from having good discussions about what's happening in our country and around the world.
Right, and I think just, you know, what comes before that is just developing respect within your classroom, and, you know, once you have that, you're able to have these discussions that are so important.
All right, well, thank you so much. I asked Natalie to join me today, and this was just amazing. I know I learned a lot from podcasting. I hope everybody goes out and does some podcasting, teaches some media lit, and if you are a journalism teacher or know one, definitely join the Iowa High School Press Association or the Journalism Education Association. So with that, I'll sign off on this IHSBA JEA iTech podcast for 2017.
Thanks for listening.
All right, I'll stop that, and then we can do some Q&A time here. You guys have any questions? So I'm formatted.
What do you guys teach? What are your...
I'm a librarian.
Okay.
School librarian. This is my student. He's high school senior.
Cool.
We had an interesting discussion earlier with some other people because I mean, I'm very political. Anyone who looks at my Twitter can see that. And so I don't talk politics with kids. I just don't do it.
Right.
And all that. And then it's, you know, when you can't avoid some things.
Right.
But so having those, I mean, I get the feeling that if you even start talking, using this language of fake news,
Right.
that kind of makes it clear where you're coming from, right? And from a pretty conservative area, you know, in the state, you know, librarians already have to watch it because you step in on a line and then they're looking at your books and, you know, and I don't want that, you know, and looking at my books. I use proper procedures to do it, but it's high school, you know, there's something to offend everybody in the library, right? So you kind of don't want that heat, but if you get this whole fake news thing, it kind of tips your hand with it. I don't know.
I think the biggest thing when I go in and teach is like, I'm not telling students where to get their news or even what to think about it. I'm just telling them to make choices. And I think the biggest problem is just Google searches and whatever pops up on Facebook. So I think it'd be a huge win if we could just teach students to be able to get a variety of news sources on their phones and know that there are out there, so that way they're not just like reading random Google searches and Facebook and and stuff like that.
So this one you had me follow gives like a few. I think it gives a couple, all sides.
Yeah, allsides.com.
So I went on their website, and so that's like Washington Post. Is that considered liberal on them?
If you go to bias, there's like a bias tab.
Okay.
It'll give you their rating of whether they think they're liberal or conservative or in the middle. I think the Washington Post is fairly in the middle.
But they have like Washington Examiner, and it's. I do think it's interesting when you look at a headline and you see from different. Because there was a study I read. I'm getting a doctorate at Jacobs, so we're doing research, and I just looked this up. I was like, well, that's an interesting way of putting that research because that's not really what it said. So then I compared, Breitbart, and because I never look and made Jezebel, and then you're like, oh my gosh, the headlines. But I don't have high school kids that I actually teach. I'm K-12, but I have elementary. Right. So the idea how to do that at the elementary level is kind of a trickier subject for me. But that was really interesting. I'm going to share it with the journalism teachers as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, you don't have to jump too much into the politics and definitely don't take a side. I think it's just more important giving them some tools to know, and then just getting them to ask questions about where they're getting their information from. And that, I don't know, there's a quote in my slideshow, the internet's like the drunken librarian that won't shut up. And that, I think that, I don't say that in a bad way, I like drunken librarians.
But it's just information
but
being
there's just
thrown
so,
at you.
there's so much blabbering and stuff on the web, and I think it's really, important that everybody just questions everything where they get it from and be, tough-minded about their information. And also the pursuit of truth is hard. Like, I mean, I had a great conversation with a history teacher yesterday about how, you know, that's the whole like fun essence of history is what the heck happened? What is real? What is the truth of this war, this situation or whatever? And then reading different, you know, nonfiction accounts of it, which, you know, I think that it's definitely changed my definition of even nonfiction is nonfiction is just a story told about reality from different perspectives, where I feel like when I was younger, nonfiction was like, this is true and real, and then fiction is made up. And it's like, okay, if this is true, it's true and real based on a human being's account and perspective of like what happened, you know, real to you or me or whatever.
I was a non-traditional student. I got my teaching degree 9 years ago. So I worked in a social studies room for just like a day. But I did a lesson on the Boston Tea Party is what they were studying.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had done some stuff with AP. I had given attack enforcement. So how to, looking at the Boston Tea Party is a great way of looking at asking the question, how do we know what happened? How do we know what really happened in history? Because there is not really evidence that people dressed up as Indians, right? And then there's another person who, his story, he actually lived to be like 116 years old, one of the men who were there at the Boston Tea Party. So you look at his story, you know, that he tells late in life, how credible is that? How credible is looking at this one and this one? It was interesting. Yeah, exactly what you said about history.
Yeah.
Really, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So how often do you podcast? I'm sorry.
Not as much as I should. I've done one other one with another teacher on the JERD cast earlier this year, and my son and I usually do a couple like sports ones, and it's kind of gone in waves in my class. Like a couple of years ago, we had a great podcasting room, which we opened up the room, which is great, but we kind of lost our little podcasting studio, so we're trying to get our space going again and get more of it happening. And I think once you get students in the habit and they know how to do it and there's a space for them to do it, a lot of, like we were doing a couple podcasts a week for like the whole year for a while. And I recommend like 3 to 5. I tell them like, the thing is most of them will get on there and just blabber on like forever and not have that much, interest. A lot of them end up to be boring. So one thing that, and I'll put the outline on there, is to have 3 topics, have some research for each topic, some newsworthy events, some facts or something else to talk about, and then do an interview. We kind of talked about that, how it seems to flow better when someone's asking questions. Some of the best ones were musician podcasts, where they'll bring in and do like the NPR Tiny Desk Studio things. So they'll ask a singer-songwriter or show choir person at our school a few questions, and they'll sing a song. And those are like 5 minutes and great. Like students love those. So. And we're trying to talk about bringing, like they started bringing in amps and guitars and stuff and like jamming out in the classroom, and talk about like changing the atmosphere to joy in your classroom. For sure, it was a huge like bringing music in and recording and all that stuff.
My students don't podcast. That's something that we need to start doing, and I just feel like being here today and like doing it for once, you know, by myself, I think it's going to be really helpful. I think I have some kids who are really going to be into it. I can see we have a new basketball coach this year, changing the philosophy of everything in our building, and our had a lot of guys quit. It's, you know, a whole new thing coming in, so I can see. I have a group of guys on my newspaper staff that's really into basketball, and so I could see them like, you know, doing some reporting about the games, like a recap or something like that. So I'm excited about it. It's just one more opportunity.
Sure. What software do you use?
I just recorded on Soundtrap right now. Okay. And we buy the premium one for like $50 or $100 or something. And that gives you unlimited recording. If you do the free one, you get like 3 recordings, and it has to be, you know, less than 5 minutes or something like that. It's
just 30 days. I just signed up,
yeah.
And you can only,
and you only get it for 30 days.
So do you have one for every student, or?
No, we do just one for the Little Hawk, and I actually just stole it to do this one. And then But a lot of them like just use, we have Macs, so they just use GarageBand
Okay.
on.
Will you edit that?
I'm
The-
just,
the
no,
podcast recording, it's just
I
goes
put
on?
music at the beginning, at the end, and I'm just exporting it as it is. My buddy, when we do the JERD cast, he goes back and like cuts out boring parts and moves stuff around. I don't do, I just run it. My students don't, they usually just stream a flow,
Sure.
like,
And who's their audience? So it's other students that, do parents listen, or do you put it out on Twitter and?
we upload it to SoundCloud.
Sure.
And then we put it on the littlehawk.com website, and then we put it out on,
Is it like a podcast with iTunes? Do you guys?
you can.
But you don't?
We had it synced to go straight to iTunes when we were doing a lot. Then our account lapsed and I haven't got it set up, but it's not hard to get it set up. The problem is you have to have a credit card associated with your iTunes account. So, and I didn't want to.
And districts don't like that.
Yeah, so that was our problem with iTunes, was the credit card thing. But I think we did find a way around that, and I don't really remember.